A wife who lost her millionaire husband accidentally met a man exactly like him in the suburbs. However, when she approached to ask, she was surprised to discover the wind carried a faint whistle through the sugar maples, their leaves a riot of amber and crimson, tumbling across the gravel lot where an old pickup rattled to a stop. A farmer climbed out, brushing dirt from his flannel, nodding to a woman hauling pumpkins to a stand nearby. Beyond them, the church stood like a postcard, white clapboard weathered by time, steeple piercing a sky streaked with October's fading light. Inside, the pews creaked under the weight of wool coats and murmured blessings, the air thick with lilies and anticipation. Mary Wheeler tugged at Peter's collar, her fingers lingering on the stiff fabric as she smoothed it flat. He squirmed, his sneakers scuffing the worn oak floor, but she held him still, her lips pressing into a half-smile that didn't reach her eyes. She'd chosen his navy sweater herself that morning, paired it with khakis, a small act of control in a world that felt increasingly unmoored. The organ swelled, a hymn she couldn't name, and she guided him down the aisle, her heels clicking softly as they found a spot near the back. "You sit still, okay?" she whispered, her voice low, almost lost in the rustle of hymnals. Peter nodded, his dark hair flopping over his forehead, and swung his legs against the pew, already distracted by the stained glass saints glowing above. Ahead, Karen stood radiant in ivory lace, her hands clasped with a man whose name Mary couldn't recall, Tom, maybe, or Tim. The vows floated past, promises of forever, and Mary's gaze drifted to the empty space beside her. She clapped when the kiss came, her palms stinging, but her chest tightened, a hollow ache she'd carried for 2 years now, ever since Wayne's helicopter went down. Peter clapped too, mimicking her, his small hands a fleeting comfort. After, in the church basement, she found Karen amid a swirl of laughter and cider. Mary handed over the gift, a baby blanket she'd knitted over late nights, cream-colored with tiny blue stitches along the edge. "It's not much," she said, shifting her weight, "but I figured you'd need it soon." Karen pulled her into a hug, her perfume sharp and floral. "You didn't have to come all this way, you know. New York's not exactly next door." Her voice softened, a thread of concern weaving through it. "You're stronger than you know, Mary." Mary shrugged, the motion stiff, deflecting like she always did. "It's your day. Wouldn't miss it." She glanced at Peter, who'd wandered to a table piled with cookies, crumbs already dusting his sweater. Besides, he needed to get out of the city for a bit. Karen's eyes lingered, searching, but she let it drop, turning to greet another guest. Mary sipped punch from a plastic cup, the sweetness cloying on her tongue, and watched the room spin with life. Old friends catching up, kids chasing each other, a fiddler soaring out a tune in the corner. She stood apart, a quiet island, her thoughts drifting to the drive up that morning. Peter's endless chatter about Spider-Man, the hum of the highway, the way she'd kept the radio off to avoid the songs that still stung. "Mom, can we go now?" Peter's voice broke through, tugging her sleeve, his face smeared with chocolate. "It's boring here." She set the cup down, brushing a crumb from his cheek. "Soon, buddy. Let's say bye to Karen first." They wove through the crowd, her hand firm on his shoulder, and after quick farewells, Karen's insistence they visit again, a nod from the groom, Mary led him to the car. The engine coughed to life, and she pulled onto the road, Vermont unfolding in shades of dusk, the horizon smudged with purple. "Where are we going?" Peter asked, twisting in his booster seat to peer out the window. "Look, cows. And a barn." "Just driving," she said, her grip tightening on the wheel as they passed a field dotted with black and white Holsteins. "Thought we'd see the town a little. You wanted to, right?" "Yeah." He pressed his nose to the glass, breath fogging it up. "It's different here. Not like home." She nodded, though he couldn't see it, her eyes tracing the curve of the road. Different was what she'd craved, away from the Manhattan apartment where Wayne's absence echoed in every corner. the boardroom photos she'd boxed up, the watch he'd left on the dresser that still ticked relentlessly. Peter's excitement rippled through the car, a lifeline she clung to, pulling her from the weight of memory. "Think they've got horses too?" he asked, his voice bright, cutting through the quiet hum of tires on asphalt. "Maybe," she said, a real smile tugging at her lips now, faint but there. "Keep your eyes peeled." The road stretched ahead, flanked by trees shedding their fiery leaves, and she let it carry them, not sure where it led, but willing to follow. For Peter, for herself, for the chance to breathe, without the past pressing so close. They passed a sign for the town centre, faded paint promising a market, a diner, a glimpse of something alive. "Can we stop?" Peter's plea came fast, his legs kicking the seat. "Please?" She glanced at him in the rearview mirror, his wide eyes catching hers, and felt the familiar pull, his joy, her tether. "All right," she said, turning the wheel toward the promise of distraction. "Let's see what's out there." The car rolled on, the church fading behind them, and Mary let the miles unravel, each one loosening the knot in her chest just a little. She didn't know what waited in the town ahead, only that, for now, it was enough to keep moving, to let Peter's wonder guide her through the dusk, away from the ghosts she couldn't quite shake. A crow swooped low over the town square, its shadow rippling across the cobblestones where a girl in pigtails chased after a runaway kite. Nearby, a man strummed a guitar, the chords drifting lazy and warm through the crisp air, mingling with the chatter of locals, haggling over jars of honey. Stalls lined the edges, their wooden frames groaning under baskets of apples, gourds, and late-season tomatoes, the scent of cider and cinnamon threading through the breeze. Mary eased the car into a spot near the market's edge, the engine ticking as it cooled. She fished a crumpled dollar from her purse and pressed it into Peter's palm, her fingers brushing his sticky ones. "Go pick something sweet," she said, her voice soft but distracted, her eyes already wandering past him. He bolted toward a candy stall, sneakers slapping the pavement, leaving her alone with the hum of the crowd. She stepped out, pulling her coat tighter against the chill, and let her gaze drift over the bustle. Farmers in plaid stacking crates, a woman arranging mums in bursts of yellow and rust. Then it hit her, sharp and sudden, like a stitch pulling loose. Across the square, a man hefted a pumpkin, his broad shoulders rolling under a grey jacket, his laugh ringing out clear and deep. Beside him, a pregnant woman in a knit scarf pointed at another gourd, her smile easy, intimate. Mary's breath caught, her feet rooting to the ground as though the earth itself had gripped her. That laugh, it was Wayne's, the one that used to echo through their kitchen on Sunday mornings. And when the man turned, handing the pumpkin to a vendor, she saw it, his eyes, hazel flecked with gold, the same jaw she'd traced with her fingers 1,000 times. "Mum, look!" Peter's voice jolted her, tugging her sleeve as he waved a caramel apple, the stick clutched tight in his fist. "Can we get pumpkins too, for Halloween?" "Wait," she murmured, barely audible, her hand lifting to still him as she took a step forward. Her pulse hammered in her throat, urging her closer, though her mind screamed it couldn't be. She edged toward a stall piled with scarves, pretending to browse, her fingers grazing wool while her eyes stayed locked on the couple. The man, Wayne or his ghost, slung an arm around the woman, casual and sure, the kind of touch that spoke of years, not moments. "Mom?" Peter tugged again, harder this time, his brow wrinkling. "You okay? You're all quiet." She forced a nod, swallowing the lump rising in her chest. "I'm fine, buddy, just looking." Her voice wavered, thin as the autumn light, but she kept her stance, watching as the man paid with a crumpled bill, his movements fluid, alive. 2 years, she thought. 2 years since the crash, the fire, the call that shattered her world. Wayne was gone, reduced to ash and a Rolex that still ticked on her dresser. Yet here he stood, or someone so close to him, Her heart couldn't tell the difference. "Do you think they've got big ones?" Peter pressed, oblivious, swinging his apple as he craned his neck toward the pumpkin pile. "Like, really big?" "Maybe," she said, her eyes never leaving the man, who now hefted a second pumpkin, balancing it with a grin. The woman laughed, rubbing her belly, and Mary's stomach twisted. Envy, confusion, a flicker of something darker. "We'll check in a sec, okay?" "Okay," he grumbled, taking a crunchy bite, caramel smearing his chin. "But don't forget." "I won't," she promised, though her mind was already elsewhere, spinning through memories. Wayne carving pumpkins with Peter on their stoop, his hands steady with the knife. His laugh when the guts splattered. She shook her head, sharp and quick, trying to dislodge the image. Grief played tricks. She knew that, had felt it in the nights she'd woken reaching for him, in the strangers she'd mistaken for him on subway platforms. This was just another mirage, her heart stitching him into someone else's life. But her hands trembled, curling into fists in her pockets, and she couldn't look away. The man turned again, profile sharp against the stall's awning, and it was Wayne's nose, the slight crook from a college football game he'd bragged about too often. The woman called to him, something soft, a name Mary couldn't catch, and he nodded, their ease a quiet knife in her ribs. "Mom, come on." Peter's impatience broke through, pulling her sleeve toward the pumpkins, his apple half-eaten now. "You're being slow." All right," she said, letting him lead her, though her steps faltered, her gaze darting back. The couple moved toward the edge of the market, bags swinging, and she tracked them, her breath shallow, her mind a tangle of doubt and need. "We'll get a pumpkin, then head back." "Two," he bargained, grinning up at her, his eyes bright with a child's simple want. She nodded, distracted, her voice a whisper. "Two." But as they wove through the crowd, vendors barking prices, kids shrieking as they darted underfoot, her world shrank to that man, his arm around another woman, his life unfolding where hers had stopped. She wanted to call out, to run to him, to demand answers from a face that couldn't be his. Instead, she followed Peter's tug, her hands shaking as she lifted a pumpkin, its weight grounding her just enough to keep moving. They paid, $1 and change, the vendor's gruff thanks barely registering, and she hoisted the gourd under her arm, Peter clutching his own smaller one. "Happy now?" she asked, forcing lightness into her tone as they headed for the car. "Yeah," he said, skipping ahead, his prize bumping his knee. "But you're still weird." She managed a laugh, thin and brittle, and glanced back one last time. The couple was gone, swallowed by the market's ebb, leaving only the echo of that laugh and the ache it stirred. She unlocked the car, settling Peter in, her mind racing as she slid behind the wheel. 2 years, and she'd buried him, mourned him, built a life around his absence. But now, doubt surged, a current she couldn't outrun, and her trembling fingers gripped the key, turning it with a force that matched the question burning through her. What if he's alive? The last light of day bled into the horizon, painting the clapboard houses along Route 14 in hues of lavender and slate, their windows flickering to life like fireflies against the twilight. A boy on a rusty bike pedaled past, his jacket flapping as he raced the dusk, while an old hound sprawled on a porch, lifting its head to sniff the cooling air. The street stretched quiet and narrow, lined with trees shedding leaves that crunched underfoot, a sleepy vein of Vermont, pulsing slow and steady. Mary kept her eyes on the taillights ahead, her hands tight on the wheel as she followed the couple's sedan at a cautious distance. Peter hummed in the back seat, a tuneless little song, his pumpkin rolling against his sneakers with every turn. She'd seen them leave the market, the man with Wayne's face, the pregnant woman at his side, and something in her had snapped taut, pulling her onto this road without a plan, only a need. The sedan slowed, veering into a driveway by a house with a red door, its paint chipped but warm under the porch light. Mary eased to a stop a block away, her breath fogging the windshield as she watched them climb out, grocery bags swinging. "Mom, why are we here?" Peter's voice piped up, sharp with curiosity, his head popping between the seats. "Are we visiting someone?" She hushed him, her finger pressing to her lips, her voice a tight thread. "Just checking something, okay? Sit back." He frowned but obeyed, slumping against his pumpkin, his humming picking up again, softer now. Mary slipped out of the car, her coat catching on the door as she shut it quietly, her gaze locked on the house. The couple disappeared inside, the red door clicking shut, and she hesitated, her pulse a dull thud in her ears. Then she saw her, a woman raking leaves across the street, her grey braid swinging as she worked, the scrape of metal on pavement cutting through the stillness. Mary crossed over, her boots crunching leaves, and cleared her throat. "Evening. I want to ask you a favor. May you let me know who lives there, across the way?" The woman paused, leaning on her rake, her eyes crinkling with a neighborly smile. "Oh, that's Natalie and James. Moved in about 2 years ago, right after the old tenants left." She tilted her head, sizing Mary up. "Nice folks. Keep to themselves mostly." 2 years, Mary echoed, her voice barely above a whisper, her face paling as the words sank in. 2 years. The exact span since Wayne's helicopter had spiraled into flame, since the police had handed her his charred watch, the only piece of him they could salvage. She nodded, forcing a stiff smile. "Thanks. Just passing through." "Any time," the woman said, turning back to her leaves, oblivious to the tremor in Mary's hands as she retreated to the car. A jogger waved from down the block, a dog barked lazily, but her world had tunneled to that red door, to the coincidence that gnawed at her like a splinter under a nail. She slid back into the driver's seat, her fingers curling around the wheel as Peter piped up again. "Was that lady your friend?" "No," she said, too quick, her eyes fixed ahead as she started the engine. "Just someone who knows the neighborhood." She pulled away, the house shrinking in the rearview mirror, her mind racing faster than the car. 2 years. It lined up too neatly, a puzzle piece she hadn't known she was missing until it clicked into place. But it couldn't be Wayne. Not really. She'd seen the reports, held his ashes, wept over an urn. Yet that laugh, those eyes, the way he'd moved, they clung to her, refusing to let go. "Are we going home now?" Peter asked, his voice muffled as he hugged his pumpkin, his cheek pressed to its bumpy skin. "To the hotel," she corrected, her tone softening as she glanced at him in the mirror, his dark lashes fluttering with tiredness. "It's been a long day, huh?" "Yeah," he mumbled, yawning, "but I like it here. Can we stay tomorrow?" "Maybe," she said, though her thoughts were elsewhere, churning through the impossible. She needed to shield him from this, from the wild hope flaring in her chest, the fear that it might collapse into nothing. "Let's get you to bed first." "Okay," he agreed, his humming fading as the car wound through the quiet streets, the glow of houses giving way to the neon flicker of their hotel sign. She parked, lifting Peter and his pumpkin from the back seat, his sleepy weight a steady anchor against her racing heart. Inside, she tucked him in, his small snores filling the room as she sat on the edge of her bed, staring at the wall. Her purse lay open, Wayne's watch glinting under the lamp, a relic she'd carried since the crash, its steady tick a cruel reminder of time marching on without him. She picked it up, her thumb tracing its face, and felt the doubt harden into something else. Resolve. That man, James, the neighbor had called him, couldn't be Wayne, not after everything. But she'd seen him, heard him, and the pieces wouldn't stop shifting in her mind. She set the watch down, her hand steady now, and reached for her phone. Answers weren't here, not in this room, not in Vermont's sleepy streets. She'd find them back in New York, where she could dig deeper, where Peter wouldn't have to see her unravel. A taxi idled at the curb, its exhaust curling into the crisp night air as a doorman in a crisp grey uniform tipped his hat to a couple stepping out, their laughter spilling onto the sidewalk. Beyond the glass doors of the Wheeler estate, chandeliers cast a golden glow across marble floors, the kind of opulence Wayne had built from scratch. His legacy as a self-made millionaire etched into every polished surface. The Upper East Side hummed outside, a symphony of horns and distant sirens. But within the mansion's walls, time seemed to slow, held captive by the grandeur of a life interrupted. Mary pushed open Peter's bedroom door, the soft creak blending with the city's pulse, filtering through the window. She crossed the hardwood, her socks silent against the grain, and tucked the blanket tighter around him, his pumpkin now perched on the nightstand like a sentinel. His chest rose and fell, steady and small, his face slack with sleep after the long drive back from Vermont. She lingered, brushing a lock of hair from his forehead, then turned away, her shoulders sagging as she slipped into the hall, the weight of the day trailing her like a shadow. Downstairs, in the vast living room, where Wayne's portrait still hung above the fireplace, she sank into a leather armchair, the cushions molding to her frame. The house loomed around her, high ceilings, crystal sconces, shelves lined with books he'd never read, its beauty a hollow gift, a fortune he'd left behind when the helicopter went down. She pulled her phone from her pocket, her thumb hovering over the screen, then dialed a number she'd kept since a friend's divorce case years back. The line crackled, and a gravelly voice answered, rough as sandpaper. "Gerald Smith." "It's Mary Wheeler," she said, her voice sharp, cutting through the late-hour stillness. "I saw something in Vermont. A man. He's Wayne. I know it." A pause stretched across the line, filled with the faint scratch of a pen. "Grief messes with people, Mary," Gerald warned, his tone blunt but not unkind. "You sure this isn't just—" "I'm not crazy," she snapped, her grip tightening on the phone, though she softened a beat later, her breath shaky. "Please, just check. His name's James. He lives with a woman called Natalie. Moved there 2 years ago, right when Wayne—" She trailed off, the words catching in her throat. Gerald grunted, the sound of pages flipping, filtering through. "All right, I'm on it. James and Natalie, Vermont, 2 years. And the crash, I'll dig into that too. You got an address?" "No," she admitted, leaning forward, her free hand clutching Wayne's watch from the side table, its cold metal grounding her. "Just a house with a red door, off the market square. That's all I've got." "Enough to start," he said, his voice steady now, a promise tucked into the gruffness. "I'll call when I've got something." "Thanks," she murmured, ending the call, the silence rushing back as she set the phone down. Outside, a siren wailed, slicing through the night, its urgency a stark counterpoint to the stillness of the room. She turned the watch over in her hands, its face glinting under the lamplight, the second hand ticking relentlessly forward. 2 years of loss, of questions, of a life she'd pieced together without him. The wealth meant nothing now, not the sprawling estate, not the accounts she rarely touched. It was all just a frame around an empty space where Wayne used to be. She stood, crossing to the window, the city lights piercing the dark like stars fallen to earth. Her reflection stared back, lines deeper than they'd been at 38, eyes shadowed with more than fatigue. Vermont had cracked something open, a doubt she couldn't bury, and Gerald's call was her lifeline, a thread to pull her from the mire of maybe. She'd seen that man, James, his laugh echoing Wayne's, his profile a mirror of the husband she'd lost, and it wasn't just grief playing tricks. It couldn't be. "Mom?" Peter's voice, small and sleepy, drifted from the hall, pulling her back. She turned, finding him in the doorway, rubbing his eyes, his pajamas wrinkled from tossing. "Hey, buddy," she said, crossing to him, her tone softening as she knelt to his level. "What's up?" "Had a dream," he mumbled, leaning into her, his warmth a quiet balm. "We were carving pumpkins with Dad." Her chest tightened, but she forced a smile, brushing his hair back. "Sounds like a good one. Want me to sit with you?" He nodded, and she led him back to his room, settling beside him on the bed, the mattress dipping under her weight. "Tell me about it," she said, though her mind lingered on that red door, on the neighbor's words, on the resolve hardening in her bones. "He was laughing," Peter said, his voice fading as sleep tugged him under. "Like at the market." She froze, her hand stilling on his back, but he was already drifting off, his breathing evening out. She sat there, the watch still in her pocket, its tick a faint pulse against her hip. Peter didn't know, couldn't know, what she'd seen, what she was chasing. She'd keep it that way, shield him from the storm brewing in her. But Gerald's voice echoed in her ears. "I'm on it." She wasn't chasing a ghost anymore. She was hunting truth, and this house, Wayne's grand, empty gift, wouldn't hold her back from finding it. Mary stood in the Wheeler Estate's kitchen, the marble counter cool against her palms as her phone buzzed, Gerald's name flashing on the screen. She answered, her voice steady despite the hour. Mid-morning, a week since their last call. "What have you got?" "James," Gerald rasped, his tone clipped, papers rustling in the background. "Hospital records from Vermont. Guy's got temporary amnesia. Past 2 years on and off. Goes blank, wanders off, forgets who he is half the time. Wife's been hauling him back." Her breath hitched, fingers tightening around the phone. 2 years, she echoed, the timeline locking into place like a key turning. "That's when Wayne—" "Yeah," he cut in. "Crash date matches. I'm still digging. Crash logs, witnesses. But this amnesia thing. It's weird. You're heading back, aren't you?" "I have to," she said, her gaze drifting to Peter's pumpkin, now wilting on the counter, a silent marker of their Vermont trip. "Karen's pregnant. I want to give her a gift. But I need to see him again too, Gerald. If he's Wayne, if he's lost like that—" "Careful," he warned, his voice softening just a notch. "Could be nothing, could be everything. I'll keep pushing here." "Thanks," she murmured, ending the call, her resolve flaring brighter than ever. She needed to know. Amnesia could explain it, could mean Wayne was alive, trapped in a fog she could pull him from. She grabbed her keys, calling up the stairs. "Peter, pack a bag. We're visiting Karen again." The rolling hills of Vermont stretched out, patched with barns and silos, their red paint peeling like old skin under the autumn sky. The air carried a faint tang of wood smoke threading through the pines, a whisper of winter creeping closer. Mary pulled into Karen's driveway, the gravel crunching under her tires as she cut the engine. She lifted a wicker gift basket from the passenger seat. Chocolates, a soft blanket, a card for the baby on the way, and nudged Peter out of the car, his sneakers scuffing as he clutched a toy car. Inside, Karen's home sprawled warm and cluttered, toys scattered across the rug, a kettle whistling faintly in the kitchen. Mary set the basket on the counter, her fingers lingering on the handle as Karen turned from the stove, her pregnant belly straining her sweater. "You didn't have to come all the way back," Karen said, wiping her hands on a dish towel, her smile crinkling her eyes. "But I'm glad you did. Peter can play with Tommy while we catch up." "Thought you could use a little something," Mary replied, her voice steady, but her gaze drifting, already half out the door. "Mind if I run to the store? Need a few things." "Go ahead," Karen said, waving her off, her tone light. "He'll be fine here. Tommy's got a new train set. Keeps him busy for hours." "Thanks," Mary murmured, squeezing Peter's shoulder as he darted toward the living room, his car buzzing in his hand. She stepped back into the crisp air, her boots clicking on the porch steps, and drove toward the town's lone supermarket, her pulse ticking faster than the watch in her pocket. She wasn't here for groceries, not really, but Karen didn't need to know that. Inside the store, fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a harsh glow on aisles stacked with cereal and canned goods. Mary grabbed a basket, her fingers tightening around the handle as she wove through the shoppers, locals in flannel, a kid trailing a harried mum. Then she saw him, near the produce, fumbling with a basket of apples, his hands unsteady, his eyes vacant. James. Wayne's face stared back at her, older, softer, but unmistakable, and her breath hitched, the basket slipping in her grip. "Hey," she said, stepping closer, her voice low but firm as she reached for an apple that rolled free. "You okay? Looks like you're having trouble." He blinked, slow and dazed, his hazel eyes locking on hers, unfocused. "I don't know," he muttered, his voice a rasp, like he'd forgotten how to use it. "Where am I?" "Here, let me help," she said, guiding him toward the service desk, her arm brushing his sleeve, her heart pounding as she steadied him. Shoppers bustled past, a cashier's voice crackled over the intercom, but her world shrank to his unsteady steps, his breath close enough to hear. "What's your name and family member?" she asked, testing, though she already knew. "James," he said, then paused, his brow furrowing, his voice dropping. "And Mary Wheeler. I only remember that name." She froze, the name a jolt through her spine, her knees locking as she stared into his face. Wayne's face, lost and searching. "What did you say?" she whispered, her throat dry. But before he could answer, a woman rushed up, her scarf slipping as she grabbed his elbow. "James, there you are," Natalie said, her smile brittle, her eyes darting to Mary with a flash of something sharp. "He gets confused sometimes. Amnesia. I'm sorry if he bothered you." "He's fine," Mary managed, her voice tight, her gaze locked on Natalie's hurried grip. "Just helping him to the desk." "We've got it," Natalie snapped, pulling him away, her tone clipped as she steered him toward the exit. "Thanks, anyway." James glanced back, his eyes lingering, but she tugged him on, vanishing through the sliding doors. Mary stood there, the apple still in her hand, its weight a cold anchor as the store hummed around her, cartwheels squeaking, a toddler wailing in the distance. Mary Wheeler. Her name, from his lips, rattled through her, a crack in the wall she'd built around Wayne's death. She dropped the apple in her basket, her fingers trembling, and paid for it absently, the cashier's chatter a dull buzz in her ears. Back at Karen's, she collected Peter, his cheeks flushed from play, his toy car still buzzing. "Did you get stuff?" he asked, climbing into the car, his pumpkin jostling beside him. "Yeah," she lied, buckling him in, her mind replaying James's words, Natalie's dodge. As she drove, Peter's voice broke through, small but clear. "I like to return here," he said, kicking the seat. "Mommy, having a man in the market last week. He looks like Dad, but I can't call him. Dad is gone. I think you saw that man too." She gripped the wheel, her knuckles whitening, but kept her tone even. "Lots of people look alike, buddy." He shrugged, humming again, but his words echoed Peter's dream from nights before, a thread she couldn't cut. Natalie's rush, James's confusion. They fueled a fire she'd only just lit, a certainty growing beneath her doubt. She was close to something real, something Gerald could unravel, and she wouldn't stop until it broke wide open. Mary stepped into Gerald's office, the door creaking as she crossed the threshold, her boots scuffing against a floor littered with crumpled receipts and cigarette butts. The air hung thick with smoke, curling from an ashtray perched on his desk, papers strewn across its scarred surface like leaves after a storm. She settled into a chair, her hands folding tight in her lap, Wayne's watch a steady weight in her pocket as Gerald leaned back, his grizzled face shadowed under the desk lamp's glare. "Got the whole mess here," he said, sliding a thick file toward her, his gravelly voice cutting through the haze. "James, or whatever his name is, amnesia's real, 2 years running, like I told you, but it's more than that now." She pulled the file closer, her fingers tracing the edge as she flipped it open, her eyes scanning hospital notes, dates, symptoms, Natalie's name scrawled as next of kin. "What else?" she asked, her voice low, steadying herself against the flood of words she knew was coming. "Natalie," he growled, tapping a page with a stubby finger, ash flaking from his cigarette. "Obsessive-compulsive disorder, diagnosed years back. Meds, therapy, the works?" She's got a history of fixating, controlling. Then there's the chopper. He slid another sheet forward, yellowed and creased. Mechanics report from the crash. Loose bolts, fuel line glitch. Flagged it day of. Warned someone, but they said hold off, said it was urgent. Her fists clenched, the paper crinkling under her grip as she read the dates. Wayne's last flight, the exact hour stamped in faded ink. Wayne's team wouldn't let that slide, she said, her tone sharp, her mind racing back to his meticulous staff, their clipped efficiency. Who ignored it? Jordan Brown, Gerald said, leaning forward, his eyes narrowing as he stubbed out his cigarette. Wayne's right-hand guy, logistics, maintenance, all that. The mechanic says Brown brought the bird in, heard the warning, and told him to wait. Next day, it's Ash. Jordan, she repeated, the name a bitter taste, her knuckles whitening as she gripped the file. He was at the funeral, shook my hand, said he'd miss him. Yeah, well, he's got dirt, Gerald grunted, pulling out a bank statement and sliding it across. Week after the crash, a big deposit, 6 figures, wired from an account tied to Natalie Arnold. Same woman dragging James around Vermont. Her breath caught, the pieces slamming together. Natalie's brittle smile, James's vacant eyes, her name on his lips. She paid him, she whispered, her voice trembling with fury and clarity. She set it up. Jordan botched the chopper, and she took Wayne. Looks that way, Gerald said, his tone grim but steady, his hand resting on the desk as he watched her process it. Crash site was a mess, no body ID'd for sure, just that watch they gave you. If he survived, if she got to him. He's alive, she cut in, her voice rising, her chest tight with a hope she couldn't tamp down. He said my name, Gerald. Recognized me, even through that fog. Maybe, he said, holding up a hand, his gruffness softening. But we're guessing till we know. DNA's the only way to nail this. Get a hair, a sample, something from James. Test it against Peter's. That's your answer. She nodded, her jaw setting as she clutched the file, the weight of it grounding her even as her pulse raced. How do I get it? He's with her. She's watching him like a hawk. Find a way, he said, leaning back, his chair creaking under him. You're smart, Mary. You've been close twice now. Next time, don't let her pull him away. A phone rang next door, shrill and insistent. A horn blared outside, but Mary's world sharpened to a single point. Someone had hidden Wayne, buried him in a life that wasn't his. Jordan, she said again, her voice hard now, her eyes meeting Gerald's. Where is he? Still digging, he promised, tapping the desk with a fresh cigarette, unlit. Got a lead, old address in Jersey. I'll track him, see what he spills. You focus on that sample. Right, she said, standing, the file tucked under her arm as adrenaline surged through her, a current she couldn't fight. Call me when you've got him. Will do, he said, watching her go, his gruff nod a silent pact. She stepped out, the door thudding shut behind her, the city's din swallowing her footsteps as she moved toward the elevator, her mind a storm of dates, names, and that one word, Mary, echoing from James's lips. She slid into her car, the leather cold against her back, and set the file on the passenger seat, her hands trembling as she gripped the wheel. Natalie's obsession, Jordan's betrayal, and the mechanic's warning. They cracked the story she'd lived for 2 years, splitting it wide open. Wayne wasn't a ghost. He was a man stolen, lost in a fog she could pierce, if she could just get to him. Gerald's words rang clear. DNA's the only way. She'd go back, find James, snag a hair, a thread of proof. And when Gerald found Jordan, they'd bury Natalie with the truth. She started the engine, the hum steadying her, and pulled into traffic, her resolve a blade honed sharp, ready to cut through the lies. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead in the Vermont hospital corridor, casting a sterile glow on linoleum, worn smooth by years of hurried steps. Machines hummed faintly from behind closed doors, their steady rhythm a quiet pulse beneath the murmur of nurses charting at the station. Mary slipped past, her coat folded over her arm, her boots soft against the floor as she scanned room numbers, her breath shallow with purpose. She'd left Peter in New York with a sitter, his school week a shield against this trip, and driven north alone, Gerald's file burning a hole in her bag, the word DNA a drumbeat in her mind. She found the room, 214, door ajar, and eased inside, the air sharp with antiseptic, James lying half awake on the bed. His eyes fluttered, unfocused, an IV line snaking from his arm as he shifted under a thin blanket. She stepped closer, her voice low and casual despite the storm in her chest. "Hey, are you feeling okay today?" He blinked slowly, his head turning toward her, recognition flickering faintly, but real. "Yeah, I think," he rasped, his voice rough from disuse. "You're from the store, right?" "That's me," she said, pulling a chair close, her hands steady as she sat. "Just checking in. How's your wife doing? Natalie, right? She must be busy with the baby coming." "She's at a checkup," he mumbled, his brow furrowing as he searched for words, his fingers twitching against the sheet. "She's good to me, always there when I forget." "Sounds like she's got it under control," Mary replied, her tone light, probing gently as she leaned in. "You two been together long?" "Maybe 2 years," he said, his gaze drifting, vague but certain. "Since, I don't know. It's blurry before that." He paused, his eyes sharpening on her face. "You look familiar, more than the store." Her pulse jumped, but she kept her smile soft, her fingers brushing his pillow as she tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "Maybe we've crossed paths before. Happens sometimes." She shifted, her hand hovering near his head, and plucked a single hair from the pillow, curling it into her palm as he blinked at her, unaware. Before he could answer, the door banged open, Natalie storming in, her eyes blazing, her prenatal chart clutched tight. "What are you doing here?" she snapped, her voice a whip crack as she crossed to James, her hand possessive on his shoulder. "Leave him alone." Mary stood, her stance firm, her fist closing around the hair as she met Natalie's glare. "I just asked him," she said, her voice low, unflinching. "And I think he is good." "He's my husband," Natalie hissed, pulling James closer, her grip protective, frantic, her scarf slipping as she shielded him. "You've got no business here, get out." Mary held her ground a beat longer, then stepped back, her eyes locked on Natalie's fury, a clue, a crack she could pry open. "Take care," she said, turning for the door, the hair a secret weight in her pocket as she slipped out. A nurse wheeled a cart past, voices murmured down the hall, but the room behind her crackled with their silent war, Natalie's rage echoing in her ears. She drove straight to a lab in town, her hands steady as she handed over the hair and a sample from Peter's brush, left behind in New York, her voice calm but urgent. "Rush it, please." The tech nodded, and she waited, the hours crawling by in a sterile lounge, her mind replaying James's words, Natalie's glare, and Gerald's file. Shadows stretched long across the Wheeler Estate's living room, the late afternoon sun filtering through heavy curtains, casting a muted glow on the hardwood where Peter's toys lay scattered. Mary sat at the dining table, her laptop open, the lab report stark on the screen, 99% match. Biological father, confirmed. She stared, her fingers hovering over the keys, the words blurring as they sank in, a tidal wave of betrayal and hope crashing through her. James was Wayne, her Wayne, stolen, alive, trapped in a life she hadn't known to fight for until now. The doorbell buzzed, sharp and insistent, pulling her from the reverie. She rose, crossing the room with steady steps, and opened the door to Gerald, his weathered coat dusted with New York grime, his jaw set as he stepped inside. "Got more," he said, dropping a manila envelope on the table, his gravelly voice cutting through the quiet. "Jordan's singing now. Caught him in Jersey this morning." "What did he say?" she asked, her voice low but edged, her hands already reaching for the envelope as she sank back into her chair. "Natalie paid him," Gerald said, pulling out a chair, the wood creaking under his weight as he sat. "6 figures, wired days after the crash. She's got a past with Wayne, old flame, college days. Jordan says she tracked him, obsessed, begged him to stage it. Loose bolts, delayed fix, wanted him back, no matter the cost." Her breath hitched and she slammed the table, the sound sharp, tears hot in her eyes as she ripped open the envelope, bank records spilling out. "She stole him," she whispered, her voice breaking, fury and relief warring within her. "All this time, Peter's dreams, my nights, I thought he was gone." "She staged it," Gerald said, gripping her shoulder, his rough hand steadying her as she shook. "We've got her now. Jordan's testimony, the DNA, it's airtight." Mary wiped her face, the tears smearing across her knuckles as she nodded, her jaw clenching. "I'm going back," she said, her voice firm now, the storm settling into purpose. "She doesn't get to keep him, not after this." "Smart move," he said, leaning back, his eyes narrowing with a gruff approval. "I'll line up the cops. Jordan's spilling to them next. You hit her with the proof. We'll bury her." "Good," she said, standing, her hands trembling but sure as she gathered the report, the records, a photo of Wayne with Peter from years back, smiling, whole, hers. Peter's TV hummed cartoons in the next room, SpongeBob's laugh a faint echo, oblivious to the tempest swirling around her. She paused by his door, peering in. He sprawled on the couch, eyes half closed, the sitter flipping through a magazine nearby. "Be good, buddy," she whispered, crossing to kiss his sleeping forehead, her lips lingering as his breath warmed her skin. She straightened, packing the evidence into her bag, her resolve hardening with each zip. This ended in Vermont, where she'd reclaim her life, her husband, the father Peter deserved. She grabbed her keys, glancing at Gerald as he stood, his nod a silent pact. "Call when you're there," he said, heading for the door, his boots thudding against the floor. "I'll have backup ready." "Will do," she replied, her voice a steel thread as she followed him out, locking the estate behind her, the grandeur a hollow shell without Wayne's laugh to fill it. She slid into her car, the engine's hum a steady pulse beneath her racing heart, and pulled onto the street, the city fading in her rear view as she aimed north. Natalie's lies, Jordan's greed. They'd cracked her world open, but this proof was her weapon, her way back to the man she'd mourned. She'd face them, demand the truth, and whatever came, Wayne whole or broken, she'd bring him home to Peter, to her, where he belonged. Night fell fast over Vermont, the sky a deepening bruise as Mary's headlights cut through the gloom, illuminating the clappered house with its chipped red door. She parked a block away, her breath fogging in the chill as she stepped out, the DNA report and family photo clutched tight in her bag. Her boots crunched on frost-kissed leaves, each step a drumbeat of resolve as she approached Natalie and James's home, the windows glowing warm against the dark. She knocked, sharp and unrelenting, her knuckles stinging from the cold wood. The door swung open, Natalie filling the frame, her eyes narrowing as she crossed her arms, her scarf loose around her neck. "You again," she snapped, her voice a brittle edge. "What do you want now?" "He's Wayne," Mary said, shoving the DNA results into Natalie's chest, the paper crinkling as she held it there, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "This proves it. 99% match to my son. You can't hide him anymore." Natalie's face paled, but she snatched the paper, her gaze darting over it before crumpling it in her fist. "Lies," she hissed, stepping back, her hand trembling as she blocked the doorway. "He's James, my husband. You've got nothing." "Let me see him," Mary demanded, pushing forward, her shoulder brushing Natalie's as she stepped inside, the air thick with tension and the faint scent of burnt toast. James sat on the couch, his head lifting, his hazel eyes, Wayne's eyes, locking onto her, a flicker of recognition dawning as she pulled the photo from her bag, holding it out. "Look at this, Peter, me, you. Remember us?" He took it slow, his fingers tracing the edges, his brow furrowing as he stared at the smiling trio. Wayne, young and whole, beside a grinning Peter, Mary's arm around them both. "I know this," he murmured, his voice halting, a crack in the fog as he looked up at her, searching. "Mary? You stole him first," Natalie screamed, lunging forward, her voice raw as she grabbed a lamp from the side table, swinging it wild and high. "I took him back. He's mine." The vase arced toward Mary, but Wayne, James, lurched up, his hand catching her arm, pulling her clear as the lamp crashed to the floor, shattering glass across the rug. "Stop!" he said, his grip firm on Mary, his voice breaking through the haze as he clutched her, his eyes wide, alive. "I remember. Mary, Peter, I remember." His arms tightened, a shudder running through him as he pressed her close, the past flooding back in jagged pieces. Natalie wailed, wrenching free, her scream a jagged shard as she stumbled, her foot catching on the cord. "No, you can't have him," she cried, her balance failing, and she fell hard, her body thudding against the floor, a crimson stain blooming beneath her skirt, her hands clawing at the rug. Mary's breath caught, but she yanked her phone from her pocket, dialing 911, her voice shaking but firm as she knelt beside Natalie. "Ambulance, now! Woman's down, bleeding, pregnant, hurry!" She dropped the phone, her hands hovering, torn between rage and pity as Natalie moaned, her face twisting with pain and defiance. Wayne sank beside her, his hand on her shoulder, his voice soft, torn. "Nat, what did you do?" His eyes met Mary's, a storm of guilt and clarity swirling there, but he stayed with her, steadying Natalie as she gasped, the blood pooling beneath her. A car hummed by outside, leaves rustled in the wind, but their chaos drowned the quiet street. The room, a battlefield of shattered lies and broken bodies. Mary stood, her legs trembling, the photo still in Wayne's hand, the DNA report crumpled on the floor. Proof she'd won him back, yet Natalie's collapse shifted the fight, her victory edged with a pity she hadn't expected. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer, and she met Wayne's gaze, his recognition a lifeline she'd fought for, now tangled with the cost of this night. Fluorescent lights glared down in the Vermont hospital, the air sharp with antiseptic as Mary paced the waiting room, her boots scuffing the linoleum, her hands twisting Wayne's watch around her wrist. Wayne sat hunched nearby, his face pale, but his eyes clear. Memory intact now, a man reclaimed from the fog. The doors swung open, a doctor emerging, his scrubs wrinkled as he nodded toward them. "She delivered. A girl. Stable now, but sedated. Lost a lot of blood." Mary exhaled, her shoulders easing, though her chest stayed tight as she glanced at Wayne, his hand finding hers, warm and steady. "And the baby?" she asked, her voice low, steadying herself for the answer. "Healthy," the doctor said, adjusting his glasses, his tone clipped but calm. "In the nursery. Needs a name if you're taking her." He left, the doors thudding shut, and Wayne squeezed her hand, his thumb tracing her knuckles as he met her gaze, a silent question lingering there. Before she could speak, footsteps echoed. Gerald, his coat rumpled, striding in with 2 cops trailing, their badges glinting under the lights. "She's awake enough for this," he said, his gravelly voice cutting through the hum of machines. "Cuffs are on, charges filed. Jordan's tape seals it." Mary nodded, following them to Natalie's room, the air sterile and tense as they entered. Natalie lay propped on pillows, her wrists bound to the bed, her glare cutting through Mary like a blade, though her face was drawn, hollowed by pain. "You think you've won?" she rasped, her voice brittle, defiant even now. "He was mine first." "He's my husband," Mary said, her tone firm but quiet, her hand tightening on Wayne's as she stood beside him, the DNA report a weight in her pocket. You stole him, hurt him. It's over. Gerald stepped forward, handing papers to the cops, his eyes hard. Obsession, conspiracy, attempted murder. She's done. Cops will take her to psych after this. The officers moved in, one reading rights, the other adjusting the cuffs, Natalie's glare unwavering as they worked. Wayne turned to Mary, his voice soft, breaking as he pulled her close, his lips brushing her forehead. I'm sorry. For all of it. For not knowing. His breath warmed her skin, a shudder running through him as he held her, guilt and relief tangled in his grip. We're enough now, she murmured, nodding against his chest, her hands steady on his back as she felt the man she'd lost return. Broken, yes, but hers. You, me, Peter, we'll rebuild. The door burst open, Peter darting in, his eyes wide as he spotted Wayne, his sneakers squeaking as he ran. Gerald had brought him from New York after the sitter's shift, a surprise she hadn't expected. Dad, he gasped, hurling himself into Wayne's arms, his small frame trembling as Wayne knelt, hugging him tight, tears streaking his face. Yeah, buddy, Wayne said, his voice thick, his hand ruffling Peter's hair as he looked up at Mary, a smile breaking through. I'm back. Cops murmured in the hall. A radio crackled with static, but their reunion anchored the chaos, a quiet island amid the storm. Mary stepped to the nursery window, peering at the baby. Tiny, swaddled, Natalie's daughter, but Wayne's too. She signed the form, her pen steady as she wrote Amy, her choice a thread of mercy weaving through the wreckage. We'll take her, she told the nurse, her voice firm, her eyes meeting Wayne's as he stood beside her, Peter clinging to his hand. She's ours now. Gerald nodded, his gruff approval a shadow at the door. Good call. Natalie's fate is sealed. You're building something here, not breaking it. He turned, heading out, leaving them to the quiet hum of the hospital. Mary took Wayne's arm, Peter's small hand in hers, Amy's carrier cradled against her chest as they stepped into the hall, the sterile tension fading behind them. Wayne's return was real, memory intact, his presence solid, and she'd chosen mercy, folding Amy into their fractured family, not shattering it further. The police station waited ahead, statements to give, but for now she held them close, her heart steady with the promise of a life reclaimed. Sunlight spilled across the New York park, gilding the grass where children darted between trees, their shouts mingling with the rustle of leaves still clinging to autumn's edge. Wayne stood by the swings, his sleeves rolled up, pushing Peter higher with each arc, the boy's laughter ringing out sharp and bright. Mary sat on a nearby bench, Amy gurgling in her arms, her tiny fingers curling around a rattle as the breeze lifted strands of hair across her face. She watched them, Wayne's steady hands, Peter's fearless grin, her chest swelling with a quiet joy she hadn't felt in years. Faster, Dad, Peter called, his legs kicking the air, his voice a beacon pulling Wayne's smile wider, his hazel eyes crinkling as he gave the swing an extra shove. Mary shifted Amy, her warmth a soft weight against her, and leaned back, the sun warming her skin, the scars of Vermont fading under this simple, radiant moment. They'd driven back that morning, Wayne at the wheel, Peter chattering about school, Amy cooing in her car seat, a family of 4 stitched together from threads of loss and mercy. Back at the Wheeler estate, the grand apartment felt alive again, its high ceilings echoing with footsteps as they unpacked. Mary set Amy in her crib, the nursery a hasty but tender addition, while Wayne rummaged through a box in the living room, his fingers pausing as he lifted his old watch, the one she'd clung to for 2 years. Look at this, he said, holding it up, the Rolex glinting under the chandelier's glow, his voice soft with wonder as he crossed to her. Still ticks. Guess it's tougher than I thought. Mine, Peter declared, darting over, his hands outstretched as he grinned up at Wayne, his dark hair flopping into his eyes. Can I have it, Dad? Please? Wayne laughed, a sound rich and unguarded, and knelt to slip it onto Peter's wrist, the band loose but gleaming. "It's yours, buddy," he said, ruffling his hair, his eyes meeting Mary's over Peter's head, a shared warmth passing between them. "Just don't lose it swinging." Mary joined them, her fingers brushing Wayne's as she pulled a frame from her bag, a new photo snapped that morning in the park. Wayne pushing Peter, Amy in her arms, all four caught mid-laugh. She set it on the mantel, next to the old one of Wayne and Peter, the images a bridge between then and now. "This stays," she said, her voice steady, her smile breaking fully at last as she squeezed Wayne's hand, the contact grounding her in this reclaimed life. Peter tugged at Wayne's sleeve, his eyes wide, his voice small but earnest. "You're staying, Dad. For real this time?" He clutched the watch, his fingers tracing its face, a shadow of old fears flickering behind his grin. Wayne knelt again, pulling Peter close, his arms firm around the boy, as he nodded, his voice thick but sure. "Always," he said, his hand cupping Peter's head, his gaze lifting to Mary, a promise etched in every line of his face. "I'm not going anywhere, not ever again." She squeezed his hand tighter, her smile softening as she leaned into him, Amy stirring against her chest, a gurgle punctuating the quiet. "We've got this," she murmured, her words a vow as much as a comfort, her heart steady with the weight of them. Scarred, yes, but whole. Outside, the city hummed. Kids shouted in the park, a vendor hawked ice cream down the block, but their bubble held, a fragile yet fierce circle of four, unbroken by the past. They moved to the couch, Peter sprawling between them, Amy nestled in Mary's lap, the watch glinting on his wrist as he chattered about swings and school. Wayne's arm draped over her shoulders, his fingers tracing lazy patterns, his presence a quiet anchor she'd fought to reclaim. Natalie's shadow faded, her fate sealed in a psych ward, her grip on Wayne severed by truth and time. And love filled the frame, spilling into the corners of their warm apartment. They were scarred but strong, a family forged through fire, facing forward now, not back. Mary rested her head against Wayne's shoulder, Peter's laughter a melody, Amy's breath a soft rhythm, and felt the future stretch open. Uncertain, yes, but theirs to shape, together. If this film touches your heart, leave your mark with a like, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel to explore more meaningful stories with us. And if you enjoyed this story, please share it with your friends on WhatsApp. And now, share your feelings with us and tell us your own stories. Every word you share is a building block that helps create our strong and enduring community. Together, we'll create a warm space where everyone can share and connect. Finally, don't miss the incredible stories coming your way soon. We're always here to bring you the best selections, full of deep values yet entertaining. See you there.